It's recording.
It's working.
Okay, my picture.
Everybody should
Got
mute
it.
themselves now. except
Okay,
Carl.
great. So officially, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming for our first training session. And I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to turn it right over to our trainer, Carl Davis, and just want to make sure we are recording. So, Carl, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bernie. As Lou kind of mentioned already, if you haven't already muted yourself, please do that. And appreciate everyone's flexibility in doing our training online. This is my first time ever doing an online training. If it's a little rough, thank you for your grace and patience as we work through figuring out how to do things the best we can with what we have right now. The way we're going to handle questions and interactions is to use the chat feature. And Bernie Rydell is going to be watching that. And so what will happen there is if you have a question or you have a comment you'd like to make or you'd like to participate, or if I ask a question and you'd like to answer it, type into the chat feature and Bernie will then recognize you, and then you can unmute and ask your question that way. And that way we don't have people trying to talk over each other, and everyone's voice can be heard equally, and hopefully we can move with efficiency and order, and all of us participate fully in the experience. If we run into problems with that, we'll figure out a better way, but that's what we're going to try starting off with. So now I'm going to open up with our PowerPoint thing, which I've never done before here except in our practice. So I think that this will allow me to do this. Okay, Bernie, is this working?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Okay, so far so good. Well, very good. So this is our development training for your district for your $1 Million Dinner, as you all know. And what we're going to look at this morning are ways that we will find the people who want to participate in this event and learn how we can best help them do that in the way that makes the most sense for them and ultimately makes our world a better place through Rotary. So our first session is about ethics and fundraising philosophy. And we're starting with kind of the most important thing. And certainly as Rotarians who believe in bringing high ethical standards to our business practices and to all we do, we feel right at home talking about ethics. This is the icebreaker that I normally do in an in-person training. We go around the room and I ask everyone to share their name and their favorite restaurant. Since we've already shared our names on our coffee get-to-know-you call the other day. And when Bernie and I looked at how long this would take to do this in this setting, we realized it would be a very lengthy process for everyone to unmute themselves and go around. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to ask you to think about your favorite restaurant and what you like about it. And if it's been closed for the pandemic, maybe when you're looking forward to going back to it. But we'll get back to the importance of that in a little bit. But I do want to welcome everyone here and say that I'm really appreciative of your personal leadership and generosity, and also your willingness to reach out and help your fellow Rotarians and friends become participants in this effort with our foundation. So whenever we try to do something, we want to make the world better. We first want to make sure we don't accidentally make it worse or create problems. So when we do something like this, we recognize that while it has great potential to make the world better and to do a lot of good, talking about fundraising, talking with our individual donors, moving money from the ownership of one individual to the ownership of the foundation, all those different things that we'll be doing do run the risk of causing problems or doing harm if not done properly. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we make sure that we don't do any harm in our efforts to do good. So to frame this, we're going to start by looking at a document that's used widely in the nonprofit sector. It's called the Donor Bill of Rights. And it's been around now for about 40 or 50 years in the nonprofit world. All nonprofit fundraisers who are members of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the industry trade group, all of the major fundraising schools and organizations, all are signatories to the Donor Bill of Rights. And we're going to start off, let's see, someone's coming in. Right, there we go. We have someone else joining us. So we'll start off by looking at what it defines philanthropy as. And I think we probably know philanthropy is a rooted of Greek word, which means love for fellow man. It says philanthropy is based on voluntary action for the common good. It is a tradition of giving and sharing that is primary to the quality of life. To ensure that philanthropy merits the respect and trust of the general public, and that donors and prospective donors can have full confidence in the not-for-profit organizations and causes they are asked to support, we declare that all donors have these rights. Be informed of the organization's mission, of the way the organization intends to use the donated resources, and of its capacity to use donations effectively for their intended purpose. So at Rotary, you know, our mission's published all over. You can look at every web page. We can look at our documents. We share our mission broadly. We're not being secretive here. We're not telling you we're going to do A and then take the money and do B. We're pretty transparent about that. Where we can run into some problems with this is due to confusion. Because we do so much and so many things, it can be easy for a donor to get confused and think that they're supporting cause A, but actually they gave to cause B. And so we need to be very clear in our communication. For instance, if a donor says, I want to give my gift to polio, which is wonderful, and we need the money to polio, it's our #1 cause, we say thank you, but we also want to make sure that that donor doesn't think that that will result in greater district designated funds for their district. Because gifts to annual fund share would do that, but gifts to polio weren't. And we're not being deceptive, but we want to make sure that our donor really does understand what the gift they're making is going to be used for. So a lot of our work will just be in making sure we communicate clearly and make sure that the donors know what they're giving to and are giving to what they want to give to. Also, we want to make sure that our donors know that the organization they're giving to has the capacity to use their gifts for the intended purpose. At Rotary, one of the best things about fundraising for Rotary is that we are big enough and sophisticated enough that we can do very powerful and complicated things. We can handle large gifts. We can manage complicated gifts. A lot of smaller nonprofits would like to accept large gifts, but they don't have the capacity to. If you think about a small nonprofit that has a $500,000 a year budget and you want to give them a $5 million gift, they don't have the capacity to manage it. And so Rotary is big enough to have the capacity to manage things and to use them effectively for their intended purposes. So that's something we can be happy about as Rotarians. Donors have a right to be informed of the identity of those serving on the organization's governing board and to expect the board to exercise prudent judgment in its stewardship responsibilities. Again, we are very clear about that. We all know who our board of directors are. We know who our trustees are. You know, we're very clear. You could just Google who is the president of Rotary and you'll get the answer instantly. So again, we meet that. To have access to the organization's most recent financial statements. Again, we're very good at that. All of these can be found on the internet and published in our financial reports, which are available for free. To be assured that the gifts will be used for the purpose for which they're given. This is one way in which we really excel. So I know from working with some of you on this call that you've already done this. We exercise gift agreements. So if a donor is going to give a gift, a complicated gift especially, but maybe a bequest gift where they won't be around when the gift is actually made with ownership transfer, we draft documents that very clearly lay out exactly what the gift will be used for. And the donor has a chance to review that and agree to it and sign it. And then after the donor signs it, the general manager of the Rotary Foundation, Mr. Eric Schmeling, signs it. And then if the gift is being made at that time, only after that document is signed does the money actually transfer ownership. And if it's a bequest, it's kept on file until the bequest is executed. So the gift agreement part of our work will be very important as well. And we'll want to make sure that our donors really do get the gift agreement and have an opportunity to review, understand it before they transfer the money. That way we know that they know that their gift is being used the way they want it to be. And to receive appropriate acknowledgement and recognition. This is an area where Rotary can be weak or strong, depending on the district that the donor who makes the gift lives in, because we really rely heavily on our volunteer structure to do this work. We have staff whose jobs it is to raise money, and we have staff whose job it is to spend the money on the grants and all of that. And we have staff whose job it is to manage the money through our investments. But we really don't have many staff who are dedicated to thanking our donors. We have a few who do things like AKS recognition. We do donor events at international convention or something. But the real work of thanking donors is completely done by volunteers. That's why in every district we have a DRFC whose job it is to thank donors. And we have in every zone an RRFC whose job it is to thank donors. And we have other volunteer positions around the zone and district whose also job it is to thank donors, to send the thank you cards, to give the crystals, and to present the wearable recognition in venues that are appropriate and meaningful. We depend on volunteers to do all that. So if you're in a place where that's really done well and you've got good volunteers who are Johnny on the spot with saying thank you, the donors get a really good experience. And unfortunately, if you're in a part of the world where they don't have volunteers who are doing that really well, the donors don't always have the best. And so that's something for us to be aware of, and you even more than me as people in your same district, that when you get all these new gifts coming in, you'll need to make sure that your district is prepared to say thank you appropriately. And I know for the $1 Million Dinner, you're going to come together in Charleston and have a beautiful dinner, and that's a great part of saying thank you. But you'll also want to make sure that your district infrastructure of sending the handwritten thank you card when the new gift comes in, or whatever it is that you do in your district that's culturally appropriate for you, is ready to be done at an increased volume. Because you'll be getting more gifts than normal, and so you'll want to be prepared to respond to that so that our donors are thanked. This is very important, and Ann Matthews alluded to this on our get-together call last week. She said, we're going to be learning information about donors and their giving, and we need to make sure that we handle that with confidentiality and respect. And we're going to spend a good amount of time now talking about what that means in a very hands-on logistical way. And if you have a question about this, please put it in the chat so we can address it. It's very important that we all know how to handle the sensitive information that we're going to be getting access to and use it appropriately. So Rotary has developed policies so that we can conform to this industry best practice in our own cultural context. And we'll get into those in a minute. Rotaries, all donors have the right to expect that relationships with individuals representing the organizations of interest will be professional in nature, and to be informed whether those seeking donations are volunteers, employees of the organization, or hired solicitors, and to have the opportunity to have their names deleted from the mailing lists that are intended to be shared. Now, here's where we have an easy solution because Rotary doesn't share our mailing lists. So we don't let other groups access our Rotary lists. And donors have the right to ask questions when making a donation and receive prompt, truthful, and forthright answers. Now, as volunteers, and even as staff, Rotary is so big, there's no one human being that knows everything about Rotary. And so I've been a Rotarian for 20 years and I've been on staff for a good while. and I've had all the trainings they give us, and I still get questions that I don't know the answer to. And so, and I might even get one today from one of you. You know, new questions come up all the time, and it's okay to say, I don't know the answer. Let me make note of it and find out who does know the answer. And so for you, it's very simple. I'm your contact person. If you get a question you don't know the answer to in your donor work, email it to me. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find out who does, and I'll get the information back to you. So you don't have to know all the different people in the Rotary world to ask. You can send all questions to me, and I'll then get it to the right people and get you the answer back. We don't share our names or mailing lists with other organizations, so you can have confidence that no other group is going to get their name from Rotary. And the next one is important when you're working with people to identify yourself as a volunteer. That has twofold effect. First of all, it lets the person know that you are a volunteer, not an employee or a hired solicitor. That's important. They have a right to know who they're dealing with. But also, volunteers can work more effectively than any of those other groups in fundraising. You know, sometimes volunteers will think, well, I'm not a professional fundraiser. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't be as effective. And that's actually not true, because donors will oftentimes listen to you even more than they would listen to me when I say something, because they'll say, well, Carl draws a paycheck to say that. You know, of course he's got to say that. He's paid to say it. Whereas you can say the same thing and they're, well, Lou or Bernie or Sue or Don or Kay or Ann or any, you know, they're not getting paid to say this. They're giving themselves, and they're just like me. And so you're speaking peer to peer. And so that's a very powerful voice. So make sure that in your conversations with your donors that you're working with, they know that you're volunteering to do this because you love and care about the cause so much that not only have you made your own gift, but you also want to share that with them too. The relationships with our donors are professional in nature. Now, I just said you're all volunteers, and that is true. However, even though you're a volunteer, you are still a representative of the Rotary Foundation when you are working in this capacity. And so you will likely learn information about your donors that they will tell you because you are representing Rotary. And they are okay with Rotary knowing what they're telling you. That does not mean that they are okay with any other group that you might be associated with knowing that information. And this is a really important point. It's an opportunity for us to accidentally make a mistake. And so I really want us to focus on this point strongly. Here's an example. I'm on the vestry at my church. We're doing a fundraising campaign. And one of the members of my church is also a Rotarian. And we're doing this $1 million dinner. And so I meet with him and talk to him about his participation in the Rotary Foundation $1 million dinner. He knows I'm meeting with him as a Rotarian. I'm representing the Rotary Foundation as this volunteer fundraiser for this effort. And I'm talking with him about making a gift, and he tells me something about his financial position. Maybe he tells me that he has an IRA that has X number of dollars in it that he has to take a required minimum distribution from. Or maybe he tells me that he owns this particular stock that has this amount of appreciation. Maybe he tells me that he's going to be selling some land and he's going to have a capital gain income. Or he tells me something about his financial position so that we can help figure out what gift is best for him in the context of our Rotary campaign. And I know that because of my work with Rotary. I go to church meeting and we're looking through the list of church members and we say, who do we think could ask to participate in the capital campaign for the new roof? And I think, you know what? Bill's got that big IRA distribution. Bill's got that appreciated asset. Bill's got that land for sale. I could say, hey, you know what? We ought to ask Bill. I've just violated the professional ethical standard of keeping that relationship professional. Because Bill did not tell me that as a church member. Bill told me that as a volunteer with the Rotary Foundation. And so that information that I learned through my professional work of Rotary, even though it's as a volunteer, belongs to the Rotary Foundation, not to me personally. and therefore I can't take it anywhere else other than the Rotary Foundation. So even if I know something like that, I can't use it for other purposes other than for my work with Rotary. And that's where it means to be of a professional nature in our relationship. That's a point where you can see how easy it would be to make a mistake. We all do so much in our communities, and we're involved with so many different things, and we often are overlapping in our service with other people in different ways, that it could be very easy to forget where the boundary lines are on this issue. So that's an important one. A solution to that would be for you to ask Bill, in this case my potential donor, in conversation with him, you could ask him personally at that time. You could say, now what you've just told me, I'm not going to share with anyone other than Rotary without your permission. And ask for permission to share that with other groups you belong to. And he might say, I don't care. No, it's fine. It's fine. I care about it all. Then you've got the donor's permission to share it more broadly. But if you don't have that donor's permission, then you can't share it more broadly. The exception to that would be information that you've learned another way. So suppose in that case, Bill told you that personally in your Rotary relationship, but then he also stood up in church and told everybody else in church the same information. Well, then you can act on it because you didn't only learn it in the confidential setting, it was also shared in other ways too. So it's not like you can't act on it because you know it over here. It's you can't act on it if you only know it over here. Does that make sense to everyone? I want to make sure that we are all clear on that. So if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put those in the chat and we can address those now.
Look, there's no questions, Carl, at least not yet. But I will say that kind of really hit home, because I've been in those kind of circumstances, and there is an uneasiness. I guess that's how you would describe it when you get that kind of information on what do I do with it? Now it's very clear cut. There's a policy on it. It's private, private, private. So I get it. I'm glad you spent some time on that. Thanks.
Good, thank you. And like I said, we don't want to do any harm. And so doing good, and people do trust us as Rotarians because they know we share their same ethical standards. And so they'll tell us these things. And we want to make sure, well, none of us would intentionally do something wrong. We want to make sure that we don't even accidentally make a mistake. Very good.
Yep.
So we have data collected about our donors' giving histories at Rotary, and it's a pretty good system. It's not perfect. No system is perfect, but it's pretty good. And we have policies about who can see that information. And so we say that people can only see the information when they have a valid business reason. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to sell them a new copy machine because I'm a copy machine salesman. And so let me call up the donors' giving histories that I have access to from my Rotary position to see who might be a good copy machine customer or something like that. It means business as related to our work in our Rotary leadership capacity. So as a volunteer fundraiser for Rotary, you will have some access to some particular donor information. Now, all this is said that donors can opt out of this. So some donors will say confidential all the way, and they will not appear on these reports that you're going to see. So the only people who will appear on our reports are people that have not chosen to opt out of appearing on them. So you have a donor in your district who I've worked with this past year around Thanksgiving time with Vice President Ann, who made a very large gift of $1 million and is so confidential that will not appear on any of these reports. And there are other donors around who have said, I want to be so private that I don't want to even appear on the reports. Most donors don't need or want that level of anonymity. They're comfortable with Rotary leadership knowing when Rotary leadership is working in their official capacity. So that's what we're talking about now. And so a club president under our policies can see the giving records for their members of his or her club when they're working with them on a gift, not just for their entertainment value, but if they're working with them on a gift. Same thing, Rotary Club Foundation Chair, a district governor can see the records of someone in the district. Same thing, past governor. District fundraising chairs can also kind of deputize other people. For instance, the annual giving chair, endowment fund chair, the polio chair, the Paul Harris Society chair, and maybe your district has district-specific fundraising roles, like you all are now in as members of this committee. You're allowed to see giving histories of the people you're working with when you need to see them to do your volunteer job. And the policy kind of outlines all of the official leadership positions. Donors will sometimes ask for confidentiality or anonymity, and we don't always know exactly what that means. And so it's good to ask them, if they say that, exactly what would you like? What do you mean when you say you want confidentiality? Sometimes it means they don't want anyone in the whole world to know except the people who are legally required to know to write the tax receipt. You know, that's the highest level of anonymity. That's like your donor who gave the $1 million wanted. Other donors just don't want anyone outside of Rotary to know. They're cool with everybody at Rotary knowing, but they non-Rotary world. Other donors will mind that Rotary knows, but I don't want people in my town to know. So recognize me at a district event or whatever, but don't come to my club. Other donors will say something like, I don't mind people in my Rotary Club knowing, but I don't want a press release out to the newspaper that I joined the Arch Clump Society or something like that. And we will do our best to honor whatever level of anonymity the donor wants. But the donor might have one particular issue in mind. And so we need to ask them exactly what they mean if they say that they want confidentiality or an anonymity in their gift. And when in doubt, you can ask me. If you're into a situation where you're not sure, you don't have to be an expert on all this. I'm your contact person. Feel free to be in touch anytime, and we'll figure out exactly the answer for your specific situation.
Carl, would you take a question or two?
Yes.
Okay, there's a question. When you're talking about giving history, are you talking about the total history for that person, or just what you can see on the club recognition summary?
I'm talking about the total donor history for that person. So for instance, suppose, Bernie, you and I were working on a gift conversation with a particular donor in your list. And we're gonna develop a strategy to talk to her about making a gift for this campaign. And in order for us to develop an appropriate strategy, we needed to know what her lifetime giving to the foundation was. For instance, maybe she's given $150,000 over the course of her life, which means she's $100,000 away from the Arch Clump Society level. And so we would want to know that as we develop our gift strategy, because we might then say, you know, it would make sense to ask her to consider a gift of $100,000 because that would make her a member of the Arch Clump Society. And that would be important information for us to have as we're working on a strategy for her. And so therefore, because that would be an essential business purpose for you to know that piece of data in our work, we would share with you, the volunteer Rotarian, that donor's giving history stands at X dollars so that we could go into that. Or we might be talking about a donor and we might say, you know, a life income agreement might be a good gift tool. And I can tell you the donor has already done a life income agreement with us. So he's familiar with the concept and therefore might be it might make sense. And you would not otherwise necessarily know that, except you had the ability to learn that piece of information because you're working in an official Rotary capacity with a specific donor. And so you'll get access to these pieces of that donor's history, which is why we train you on how to handle it ethically and responsibly and all that, what we just covered, because you will get some access to those sorts of data points, but only as they're needed. You know, we're not going to share, okay, here's the giving history of everybody in South Carolina in an Excel file, use it as you want. It will be only as needed when appropriate and when necessary for a gift strategy that you're working on with me. Does that answer the question?
I think that answers the question, but the follow-up to that is, if we're working with a particular individual, do we get that kind of information from you? Is that who we go to?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It would come in the context of us having a conversation about gift strategy for each individual prospect that you're working on.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, it's not always all that necessary. You know, I'll often look at it and just look at it and say, it doesn't really we're talking about. Other times you can look at it and it can be helpful. And that's very one-off specific. You know, as I've said, if the donor has for instance, maybe the donor has a level 1 bequest. And I might say, you know, asking them to go to level 2 makes a lot of sense because they already have a $10,000 bequest. So let's ask them to increase the amount to level 2. If that's an option when it makes sense. You might look at another donor who doesn't really have much of a giving history at all, and we're asking for a first gift. And so then it really wouldn't matter as much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So is that all the questions, Bernie?
Yes, that's all the questions.
Okay, good. Good, because I don't want to miss any. I really want to get all the questions in. This next slide here is about fundraising. And I asked you at the beginning to think of your favorite restaurant. And the reason I did that is for this moment now. And when we talk about fundraising, it can be intimidating to a lot of people. You know, it can be something we're afraid to do. It can be something we're nervous about doing. It can be something that we dread doing. It can be something that we know we should do, but we put off doing. But I really want to encourage you with the idea that when done right, it's really fun. And, you know, I think it's so fun I've chosen to do it for a living, but it's really something that can be meaningful and enjoyable, just like inviting our friends to come to dinner with us. If you think about your favorite restaurant, whatever it might be, you've probably invited somebody to go to dinner with you there, or you've told somebody about it. I travel a lot. Before, you know, in the long ago, in the before time, I used to travel a lot anyway. And so that allowed me to go to lots of different great restaurants and lots of different places. And so whenever I have a friend who tells me they're going to XYZ place, I'll always say, oh, if you have time, go check out such and such a restaurant, you know, that's there. Or if they're in town to visit me, I have places I want to take them to eat because I like it so much. I want to share that joy with the people I care about so they can get the same joy and experience that I've got. It's the same thing with inviting someone to give to a charity. We have gotten so much meaning in our lives out of our giving to Rotary Foundation that we want to invite our friends and colleagues to have that same joy and experience that we get. In New Orleans, I'm going to tell you where to go eat to get absolutely the you have ever had. And I'm going to tell you that because it's just the best jambalaya there is, and I want you to enjoy that. If you care about impacting the world in a positive way, I want to tell you how to give to the Rotary Foundation to make a difference in the most powerful way imaginable. Because I found this is a great tool to make the world better. I want to share it with you because you share that same value as me. Now, similarly with restaurants, I have friends who are vegetarians, and I would not tell them about the best steakhouse I've ever been to in rural Missouri because they really wouldn't enjoy that menu too much. And I would need to be both knowledgeable about my friend's palate as well as the menu options on the restaurant before I made a recommendation that was a good recommendation. It's the same thing with fundraising. We need to know our donors' passions and interests and what our donors want to do in the world, kind of their taste, their menu, their palate, what they want to eat at a restaurant, what difference they want to make in the world. And we have to know what the nonprofit we're talking about is doing in the world, kind of like the restaurant's menu. And when we know both what the person likes to eat and what the restaurant menu offers, we can make a really good recommendation. Similarly, when we know what our friends want to do in the world philanthropically, and we know what work the charity is doing, we can make a really good match and alignment there too. And so what we're going to really talk about in our fundraising training is how we get to know those two things, because those are the two things we really need to know to be good fundraisers. How do we find out what our friends want to do in the world philanthropically? And what do we know about what Rotary is doing? Because when we know those two pieces of information, we can make the invitation to participate in a way that's very enjoyable, powerful, fun, and impactful. And everybody loves it. Just like, you know, we've all gotten messages from our friends who, I went to that restaurant you told me about and it was wonderful. Thank you for sharing it. And that's how our donors respond to us when we make the connection for there to have the philanthropic impact they want to have. Similarly, if you were to tell me you were going to a place where I knew there was a great restaurant, I really wouldn't stop and think too much about, well, I better not tell him about the restaurant because he might already have plans to eat dinner. Or I might say, you know, I'm not going to tell him about that restaurant because it might be in a price range he's not looking for. Or I'm not going to tell him about that restaurant because it might be too far away from the hotel he's staying at. You know what? I'm just going to tell you about the restaurant and I'm going to say, look into it and see if it's a place you want to go. And I'm going to rely on them to go online and check out located, menu is, and then let them decide whether or not it's for them. I'm not going to say, oh, well, I won't even tell them about it because what if? But we do that with our fundraising a lot. We don't ask people if they'd like to participate in our philanthropic opportunities because we say, well, they've got kids in school, or well, they haven't been a Rotarian that long, or well, they might not want to do it, so I just won't even talk about it. So just like we wouldn't say, well, I'm not going to tell them about this great restaurant, we say, I'll tell them and let them decide. We can take that same kind of attitude when we're approaching people to participate in philanthropy. And so kind of looking at our work in the same way and with the same excitement that we have about inviting friends and colleagues to go to restaurants we like will help us, I think, do our job in a way. Also, the fun test is a good way to know if we're ready to make a solicitation for a gift. If it feels fun and we're excited about doing it, it's probably a good idea. If we're still nervous about it, we're probably not ready to do it yet because it's supposed to be fun and exciting. And when it's done right, it is. And I know many of you on this call are very generous donors yourselves. And you've been in that position where you've made the gift and it's been a really fun decision for you. And you've been excited and happy with the opportunity. I did this, it's great. The world's better because I do something that's cool. And we want to give donors we're working with those same sorts of good feelings and experience. Any questions about that before we move on?
No, I don't think so, Carl.
Good deal. This next slide is my lead by example slide. And you already all do that and have done that and have committed to participating in this campaign as well. And that's really important. Rotarians are leaders. And so whenever I'm working with Rotarians, I know that you all know this, that every good leader leads by example. And so when it comes to leading in our philanthropy, that's no exception. There's a big difference between saying, join me in giving to this important work, and saying, you know what, you ought to give to that. Those are very different statements. And we are not in the you ought to do this business. We're in the join me in celebrating and participating and working together business, leading by example. Now, Does that mean that I can't ask someone to give a six-figure gift if I've never given a six-figure gift? Not at all. What it means is that I have to give the gift that's right for me. And when I've given the gift that's right for me, then I'm leading by example to ask someone else to give the gift that's right for them. And because we're all different and we have different assets and we have different goals, financial and philanthropic, we're at different stages of life. We have different family situations and business situations. Our gifts are going to be different. And that's great. That's the power of doing this work, is that we can work with individuals to help them make the gift that's right for them, just like we've made the gift that's right for us. So for one person, it might be a bequest. The other person, it might be an outright gift. The other person, it might be a gift of property. The other person might give stock. The other person might do a trust. The other person might do an annuity. It doesn't matter what the gift type are. It's doing the gift that's right for you, and then asking your friends and family and colleagues and fellow Rotarians and business associates to make the gift that's right for them. But it does start with our own personal leadership and participation in the way that's right for us. So why would someone give to a foundation anyway? Well, a few years ago, I wrote a book, and the title of the book is Because Donors Want to Share. And it's about how to do individual fundraising. And when I was looking for a cover for the book, I came across this photograph you're looking at now. And I used that because a picture's worth 1,000 words. And you just look at that picture and you know the answer as to why someone gives to charity. That boy is not concerned about a tax receipt. He is not concerned about getting a lapel pin or a crystal. He's not concerned about being invited to dinner or having his name inscribed on the side of a building. He is sharing that ice cream cone with his retriever because he loves that ice cream so much and he loves that retriever so much that he wants that dog to get the same joy that he's getting. And so he's reaching over and he owns that ice cream, and he says the best joy he can get out of that ice cream is not by eating it all himself, but by giving it to the dog so the dog can enjoy it too. He wants to share. And our donors are that way too. Maybe not necessarily just with ice cream and their dog, but with their other resources and the world. They have resources and they say the best way I can use these resources is not just all for myself, but to use them with other people in the world. They want to share and make the world a better place. And so that's the main reason. That's the motivator. The other things are logistics. Well, okay, I want to make the world a better place. What's the best impacts that? So I'm going to use asset A instead of asset B so that I can be most effective. Or I'd like to have this other opportunity as well. So how can I do that? But they're not the drivers. The driver is really the desire to share. And when we're talking about finding people to make a gift, we really are not looking at finding people who want to have these other things. We're looking at finding people who have a passion in their heart to do good in the world and make the world better and share. The rest of the things are the nuanced, detailed logistics that we work on to do this sharing in the best way possible, but they're not the driver. How do we find people like that? Well, the world of fundraising has offered us some scientific steps to help us organize our work and be more efficient. And I'll be the first to say that most of these come from a wonderful man named Hank Rosso, who started the fundraising school at Indiana where I went. And now they've become kind of industry standards, but I want to, give credit to Mr. Rosso for kind of being the first one to write these stuff down years ago. We have a process for finding people who want to share like that, and it's 4 steps long. The first step is identification. The second step is cultivation. The third step is solicitation. And the fourth step is stewardship. By organizing our work according to these 4 steps, we will be efficient and effective. If we just go into our relationships with our donors kind of without a plan or a method or a structure, we'll still raise money, but we won't raise as much money and we won't raise it as quickly. Therefore, we will not be giving the best service to our donors. And we want to give the best service possible to our donors. And therefore, we want to work with order and method to what we're doing. So the first step is identification. Every donor has 3 traits in common: linkage to the agency, in this case Rotary, interest in the agency's mission, and the ability to make a financial gift. I'll also tell you that when we are done with all of this training, I'm going to email out this slideshow to everyone. And so you'll have access to this on, well, I'd say on paper. You'll have access to this electronically, and you can print it out on paper if you want, or read it on your device once the training is over. And so don't feel like you have to memorize every slide you're looking at. You will get this in writing after we're done. Linkage, interest, and ability. When we meet somebody and we're saying, are they a prospective donor? We want to look and ask, do they have linkage to Rotary? Do they have an interest in our mission? And do they have the ability to make a financial gift? Now, in this case, we're talking about a particular major gift effort. So when we say ability, we're talking about a gift of $10,000 or more. So linkage. Things that we will ask ourselves about our donors to determine what their linkage is. Does that donor feel connected and part of Rotary? Do they have many friends or family who are also in Rotary? Does Rotary play an important role in their life, in their personal identity? If you were to ask them to describe themselves, would "I'm a Rotarian" come up as part of that self-described language? What's their attendance like at club? Do they wear pins or license plate or have stickers with the Rotary logo on it? These things show linkage. Excuse me. Now, I will say that just because a person might have linkage to Rotary or their Rotary club does not necessarily mean they have all that much linkage to our foundation. So sometimes we might find that they're very active in their Rotary club, but they don't know that much about our foundation. That means that they're good candidates for having high linkage to the foundation, but we might need to do work to build that foundation linkage up. They just might not know much about the Rotary Foundation. They only know about Rotary as the RI side. But those are questions that we need to ask about each person that we're thinking about asking for. What about their interest? Well, is this a person who wants to see the world work the way that Rotary is working to make it work? They might be involved with service projects. They might have worked on grants, polio eradication, peace centers, or other Rotary projects in one or more of our 6 areas of focus. So in other words, do they like something that Rotary is doing? The good thing here for us as fundraisers is that Rotary does a lot. We are not just a Johnny one-note organization that only does one thing, and if you don't care about that one thing, you're not a prospective donor. Going back to our restaurant analogy, we're not like that little steakhouse outside of Columbia, Missouri that I told you about that literally only serves steak and baked potatoes and absolutely nothing else. That's all they serve. We have a whole big buffet of options. We're a huge array of opportunities. So we can probably find something that the donor likes. It might not be the same thing Rotary does that we're most passionate about, but it's something Rotary is doing. And so we're very fortunate that we do so many things that we can probably find something that the donor is interested in. Here's where it's also important for us to listen to the donor. We can't go into the conversation and say, basic education and literacy is important to me, and therefore I'm going to say that it must be important to the donor, or water and sanitation, or economic development, or any area, whatever it is we care about. We have to go in, and instead of telling the donor that, we need to listen to the donor to find out what their passions are and what they'd like to give support. And be responsive to the donor rather than making the donor be responsive to us. Now, ability is the metric that we tend to pay too much attention to. When we start talking about who makes a good major gift prospect, the natural thought is to think of the people we know who have the most financial ability. And I'm going to tell you, that is not the way to go about making our list. Of these three metrics, ability is the least important to consider. Somebody once asked me a while back, they said, Carl, you must work with a lot of rich people. And I thought about it and I said, no, the truth of the matter is I work with a lot of generous people. And we're not really out here to look for people who have great financial wealth. We're out here to find people who have generous hearts. And when we find people who have the generous hearts, we can work with them to help them make the gift that's right for them. If we just go out to look for financial capacity, we'll waste a lot of time and energy, because just because a person might have a lot of money doesn't mean that they care at all about your organization or about your mission. There are organizations that all of us could think of that even if we had all the money in the world, we would not give one dime to, because we don't agree with their mission or we don't like the way that they're run. So just looking at ability wastes our time. Instead, we need to look at find people who know us and like what we do. And then we can worry about ability once we find that person. The good news about working with Rotarians is that almost every Rotarian, almost, has the ability to some way or another make a gift of $10,000 or more if they really wanted to. It could be through any one of our very long list of gift options, which we will spend a session training about. But it can be a cash gift, including stock. It can be a pledge over 3 years. It could be a life income agreement, or it could be a bequest. And we can pretty much assume that almost everybody we think of could come to terms with making a gift of this sort. And you know what? If in the course of this campaign, we find somebody who has really high interest and high linkage and they really want to, but turns out they can't give 10,000, but they end up giving 5, while it might not necessarily count for this campaign, we've still done a great service to that donor and helping them have the philanthropic impact, and they've still made the world a better place. And that's not a bad thing at all. And it's a much better use of our time to have that conversation and raise $5,000 than it was to have a conversation with someone who has all the money in the world but chooses not to give 1 penny up. And so again, don't worry too much about the financial capacity. Think more about who has the interest and who has the linkage. So once we make a list of our donors, which we'll be doing in our last session, we're going to rate each one of them in a category of linkage, interest, and ability. And we're going to figure out which of those 3 metrics is high, which is medium, and which is low. And if you've got a donor who is high in all 3, they're probably already ready to be asked for a gift. And if you have a donor where one of those is lower than the other 2, then we're going to work on a plan to raise the lowest of those 3 metrics. So suppose I have a donor who I can assume ability is okay, and I can assume interest is good because I know that they care about education, but I don't think they really know what Rotary does in terms of our work on education. So their linkage to us in that way is low. I'm going to develop a process where I raise the lowest of those 3 metrics, in that example, linkage, up so that it's ready to make a gift, because those 3 metrics, linkage, interest, and ability, the lowest of those 3, if you think of them as ceilings over the donor's giving, the lowest of those 3 is where the donor's giving caps out at. And if we raise the lowest of those 3 ceilings, the donor's giving increases corresponding. And so what we're looking at for all of our donors, linkage, interest, and ability, which is the lowest of those metrics? And then we develop a plan to raise the lowest of those metrics through our interactions and our relationships with the donor. And we call the process of doing that cultivation. So now we are in the second of our 4-step process. We began with identification, where we thought about our friends and family and colleagues, and we rated them, linkage, interest, and ability, who has that? And now we're looking at cultivation. Now what do we do once we have our list? So cultivation is the process of communicating with the donor, first to confirm the assumptions we made. You know, I thought he really liked steaks, but I need to make sure that that assumption is really true. So I'm going to ask questions and make sure that that's true. And then I'm going to work to build the weakest of those areas up. So how would we increase linkage if we find that that's the weakest of them? Well, we can introduce them to other donors who share similar interests and have similar backgrounds, and then they can talk and get to know one another and say, well, you know, I did this, and maybe they'd be interested in doing that too, and let them build friends with other Rotarians who are of similar mindsets and perspectives and situations and personalities. We can invite them to events. I mean, I guess in the present day and age, that means watching Zoom meetings because we're not doing in-person meetings, but in the old world, it meant going to physical things, and hopefully it'll mean that again someday, but now it could mean watching a webinar or a video or a YouTube channel or something virtual. How do we increase our interest? If we know the donor likes Rotary and trusts Rotary, and we know they have ability, but the lowest of theirs is their actual caring about what we do, how do we build that? And a lot of that is education. Educate the donor about the things Rotary is doing to make the world better, and share stories of improved lives. That will often inspire a donor to become interested. A good example of this is polio. Polio has been erased, thank God, from the landscape in the United States for at least one, arguably maybe even 2 generations now. And so many of our newer Rotarians don't understand how bad polio is. You know, they've never seen it. It's a history book term. But when they can understand that it's still a terrible thing, and they can see the videos and pictures of people who suffer from polio around the world today, and they can hear the testimonies of people whose lives have been impacted by it, then they can understand why it's still something to care about. And then they can say, yes, I want to be part of eradicating polio. I understand now. But until they saw that personal story, they didn't know. They didn't feel an interest in it. But they made the personal connection, and then their interest grew. And that can be true of any of our 6 areas of focus as well. We all know that stories and pictures and images are powerful ways to communicate. And that's true when we're talking about building donor interest too. Fundraising is important. In fundraising, it is important for us to share stories, but also to share facts and figures as well. We need a balanced approach. We can't just present all facts and figures and statistics. We need to present heartwarming personal stories of impact human to human, but we can't just present an emotional appeal also. We also need to back that up with our facts and our figures so our donors know that we're not wasting the money, that we actually are using it according to the principles that we say we're going to use it for, and that we're actually fixing the problems that we're showing them. And so in our work to share interest, we need to share both facts and figures. I think we've all seen only one of those being done. We've all been to a polio or to a foundation presentation at some point in our Rotary lives where it's just been slideshows about statistics and numbers and graphs. And we've said, that's nice, but it didn't really touch our hearts. And we've also been to other presentations where it's been all about stories. And we're like, well, that's really touching, but what are we doing about it? And so we really do need to present both. And of course, all of our human brains are wired a little differently. Some of us do really well with facts and figures and don't really benefit as much from the images and the stories. Those of us who are like that, like me, are probably in the minority in the human family. But we are out there, and so we need to have that for that donor segment. Other donors the facts and figures don't really touch them too much. The stories do, and the pictures do, and the images do. And that's why we really need to do both. And which one we do more of is not about us, it's about the donor. So I might really like just to talk about facts and figures, but the donor needs and wants to hear the stories and see the images. So my job as a fundraiser isn't just to do what I like, but it's to do whatever the donor I'm working with at that moment wants. Increasing ability. Well, we really can't increase ability. That's why it's in quotations there. I mean, unless we want to write a check from our account to theirs so they have more money than they used to have, we really can't increase someone's ability. But what we can do is help the donor learn about giving options that may liberate them to make a bigger gift than they thought possible. And this is the most fun thing we get to do. I absolutely love when we talk to somebody who thought they could only do this much but really wanted to do more. And when we talk to them and put this new giving strategy on their radar screen, they realize that they actually can have a bigger impact than they ever thought they could. They are just thrilled because they can do what they want to do. We've made their dream come true. We've let them make their dream come true, really, by just giving them some information that they didn't otherwise have. And this is really common because most people in our world are not professional fundraisers. Most people in our world are not professional financial managers or investment people. They do their jobs and they have their passions and their careers and everything, but they don't know all the different ways that they can use their assets for charitable impact. And when we put options on their radar screen that they didn't otherwise have, we just helped them do something that they could do all this time, but they didn't know they could. And it makes the world better and it lets them have the impact they've always wanted to have. My favorite story about this is a woman I used to work with up in Virginia named Jody, and she works for the College of William and Mary up in Williamsburg. And she's a very strong Rotarian. And when I visited with her, she said, you know, I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. She just, every time I'd thank her for doing something, or I'd say, I heard you did something, she said, I wish I could do more. And in talking about it, I said, well, Jody, let's see if maybe you can. Do you mind talking about your assets? She says, well, there's not many, but I'll talk about them. So we were talking about her assets. And I asked her, I said, well, Jody, do you save for retirement? And she says, oh, yes, but you can't have that money. I need that for when I'm retired. And I said, well, Jody, what about after you're done being retired? And she paused and she hadn't thought about that. And so at some point in time, she will go on to her reward and not need those assets anymore. And at that point in time, she can make a charitable gift of them. And she had never thought of that. That option existed before we had breakfast, but she didn't think about it. No one had told her she could do that. She hadn't thought about that. And she's still at a younger stage in her career where she's just thinking about building those assets. She's not thinking about even using them yet. She's just thinking about building them. But by putting a bequest in her retirement plan, she's able to have the philanthropic impact of the really big world-changing gift that she would love to do now if she had the ready cash, but she can do it through a bequest. And she's now one of the biggest bequest society members in District 7600 because of that. And she's just thrilled that she gets to know that she has that impact. And so we can open doors for our donors. It's technically not increasing their ability because she already had that money. She just didn't know she could use it in that way or hadn't been thinking about it. Or donors won't know what a charitable gift annuity is, let alone that they could do one. And when you talk with somebody and you'll say, yeah, you can get 5% return every year for the rest of your life as long as you're alive, they didn't know that they could do that. And so as soon as they know they can do that, they're ready to do it now. Again, we didn't increase their ability. We just let them know something that they didn't know before. And that's how we increase ability. And that's really fun when that happens. So this takes a long time. Major gift cultivation can take months, even years. Now we have a time frame on our campaign, so we will have some gifts come in. Most of our gifts will come in during this campaign, but your work is going to have lasting impact even beyond after y'all eat dinner together in Charleston. You are going to see that people will continue to make their gifts based on the conversations you've had years after years. I routinely get phone calls from people that I've met with years ago, and they tell me they're ready to do that thing we talked about. And I have to be embarrassed and say, remind me what it was again, because it's been 6 years. And they've been thinking about it the whole time. They're ready to do it now. And I've done other things. And oh, that's right. I remember now. And if they email me, I can call it up in the database and look it up before I call them back. But if I just answer the phone and I'm caught on the spot, I have to say, what was it again? But people will take their time and move at their own pace, and that's okay. We're not trying to rush anybody. We're trying to help people do what they want to do. And they will make the gift that's right for them at the time that's right for them. And the ones that come in the time frame of our $1 Million Dinner will be celebrated there. And the ones that come in after that will be appropriately celebrated then too. So the most important thing is that we work on the donors' time. Donors will often make smaller gifts while they're in the process of deciding on their larger gift, and how they get treated while making those smaller gifts impact whether they make the large one or not. There have been lots of donors who I've been in the conversation with a very large gift about, and in the meantime, they're making their $1,000 a year gift or whatever they give, and they're getting thanked and feeling respected and appreciated and knowing that those smaller gifts are doing what they want them to do. Every time that happens, that makes them more likely to say yes to the larger gift they're thinking about. Conversely, if they have a bad experience with those smaller gifts, it makes them less likely to think that Rotary is the best place for them to make their larger gift that they're in the process of thinking about. And again, since we never really know who's thinking about what, we never really know the mind of another person, it's important for us to do a good job of thanking all our donors, even when the gifts are of small dollar value. Not only because it's the right and ethical thing to do, but also because if you mind the pennies, the pounds will take care of themselves, as my grandmother used to say. It's important to be faithful with the small things, and then they trust us with the big things. So this is important for us. When we say fundraising, we often think about asking for money. That's what we think it is. But the truth is, of that 4-step process, identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship, the shortest and arguably easiest and maybe even least consequential step is the actual asking, the solicitation. If you were to look at, so as a professional fundraiser, every time I meet with a donor or have a significant interaction with a donor, it is either cultivation, solicitation, or stewardship. I'm doing one of those 3 things. I'm either cultivating, building that linkage, interest, or ability, or I'm learning about how I can better do that, or I'm asking for the gift, or I'm thanking them for the gift, stewardship. I'm doing one of those 3 things. And if you were to call up, any particular individual donor's record of who I've worked with, you'd see that there's a whole lot of cultivation. Hopefully there's a lot of stewardship. We rely on volunteers to do a lot of that in Rotary. So I don't have as much of that as most other companies would have their gift officers have, because we have volunteers supporting them. But I don't have that many solicitation. I might have 10 meetings with somebody, 6 of which were cultivation, 1 of which was a solicitation, and the remainder were stewardship. Most of our work is actually not in the area of solicitation because it's easy to ask. But if we don't know what to ask for through doing good cultivation, the asks won't be effective. So asking is actually a very small part. Hank Rosso, kind of the man I cited earlier, has defined a good solicitation as the right person asking for the right gift in the right way at the right time. And when all those rights align, it's time to ask. And if all those rights don't align, then we're not ready for solicitation yet. And a good way to know when all those rights align is when we're all feeling the excitement and happiness and energy about the gift. That excitement that we feel when we're inviting someone to a restaurant that we like. I often don't even get to solicitation technically. There are many gifts, and I think I've worked with many of you on this, and you say, well, I don't, if you thought back, did I ever ask you for the gift we worked on? Maybe not, because we just walked our way into it through our conversations and cultivation. It grows organically. We're talking about what we can do in the world, and we find an alignment. I really want to do this. I really want to do this particular thing. And then we talk about assets, and we say, you know what? I want to use this asset, and we talk about gift vehicles. And we say, you know what? This gift vehicle really makes sense. And we just walk our way into all of a sudden the gift is happening. We just talk about, I want to do this, and I want to use this asset, and yeah, I want to do this, and here's how we transfer the money, and here's how the recognition will happen. Now all of a sudden, the gift is happening without an actual formal conversation of, Bernie, would you like to give $25,000 to the endowment fund to support work in basic education? We just talked about it, and yes, happened. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very organic and happy way. And so solicitation is that process of cultivation finishing. It's where it grows and it just evolves. And when it's done right, there's no bite your nail pressure moments of high anxiety. It's a moment of excitement and passion and joy and coming to a decision about, yes, we want to do this. Now, that's not to say we don't ever ask a question. Sometimes we do. Naturally in conversation, I will sometimes say, after we've talked about something, does that sound like something you'd be interested in doing? Or is this a gift type you'd be interested in talking about more? Or is this a gift type you'd like to do? We ask questions like that all the time, but we don't necessarily have to. Sometimes it just evolves in our conversation. And I think when we're really doing our cultivation well, that's when it just naturally evolves into that. And of course, this is all very personal and personality based, and the personality of the fundraiser and the personality of the donor and how those things will work together. And also very culturally different.
How do you think about protection?
About who?
The protest.
Oh, wow.
I think
It's,
somebody is unmuted.
Carl, can you,
this has been going on
you
for
be able to
a long
mute
time.
them?
Really?
Oh, yeah. Well, the inequities. Yeah, the inequities.
Okay, I think I did.
Great.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping me remember I can do that as the host, Bernie. A lot of this is culturally dependent as well. And our donors come from a lot of different cultures and cultural backgrounds. And so part of our cultivation is learning that donor's cultural background and how they like to be approached. And it's cultural doesn't necessarily just mean race or religion or gender or age. Lots of things can impact culture, some of which are very visible to us and others of which are not obvious. And that's why it's important for us to get to know our donors and their preferred communication styles and their preferred ways to interact. Some donors might prefer things in writing. And in that case, we might draft a memo to bring to the meeting to show what they can do, or send it to them on email. Other donors prefer conversation. And we'll learn through our cultivation meetings how this donor likes to be communicated with. And then certainly when it comes time for solicitation, we'll use the communication style that the donor chooses to use. So all that to say, solicitation can sound scary. It's not. It's actually really fun when done right. A measure of when it's being done right is if it's fun. And it's not something we really have to worry about too much. It will naturally happen if we do our cultivation well. Also, it's not something we have to do alone. The industry opinion is that solicitation is best done with peer-to-peer, so one donor asking another with an expert witness present. So if we were going to do this by what the textbooks say is generally a best practice, and again, this is all pre-virus, we might meet together with your donor, me being an expert witness and you being the peer, and we might ask the donor to make a gift, and you would be there to ask fellow Rotarian giving to other fellow Rotarian giving, and I would be there in case the donor had technical questions about the gift vehicle that you as a volunteer are not professionally trained in, but I am as a professional fundraiser trained in. And so you might, as in this team approach, you might say, would you give to this philanthropic cause that we both care about? And then I might be able to say, and using appreciated stock might be a very good way for you to fund your gift. And I could answer questions about that. So that's kind of how the industry says the best way is. Now, like everything in life, there's no universal best. It really does depend on the individuals and the individual situations. I do a lot of work without a volunteer present, and volunteers do a lot of work without me present. And in this day and age, we're doing all of this electronically now. We can't be physically present together. And so we can't conform to that. We have to figure out a way to do it now. And we're all learning that together. And so the most important thing, I think, is in this work to use the guiding principle of what works best for this donor, not what works best for me. And if we stay true to that guiding principle, we'll figure out our way through this as best we can. Stewardship.
Carl,
Yes.
before you leave,
Yes.
before you leave the solicitation, I do have somebody has a question here. We've been talking about one-on-one kind of personal solicitations. Well, is there a way in this campaign, is there a way that you can at a club meeting maybe talk about this campaign? Anybody interested? You know, let me give you some specifics, but if you're interested in making a contribution, you know, see me after the meeting. Or is it things we can do via a newsletter or some kind of publication that the district puts out? Is there value in doing that?
Yes, but those would be under the cultivation part of the cycle, not, or maybe even the identification type of the cycle, not the solicitation. So for instance, if I'm speaking at a club and I talk about the different opportunities we have for philanthropic impact, I will say, if you're interested in talking about this more, talk to me after the meeting. Or I'll often pass out my business cards when we're meeting in person on everybody's table and say, take one of my cards. If the person is interested, then they come one-on-one. And then we start this process I just talked about of getting to know them. The main part of all of this is getting to know the donor. It's not us telling the donor, it's the donor communicating to us, and it's conversation where we are largely listeners. And that can't be done from a one-way broadcast from a podium or in a print medium or on a web page or an email. However, those things do play an important role in the campaign in the identification and can in the cultivation and can even in the stewardship phase, but only to the point that in the cultivation and identification stage, they serve as a way for people to self-identify as interested people and come to us to begin the one-on-one conversations. They're important, but they don't stand alone. Does that make sense, Bernie?
I think so. I may have phrased it wrong, but I guess it's like you said, self-identify. I guess that's what you would be accomplishing if you did a program, or
yes,
people would have to.
And that's really important because that's the only way, especially now where we can't just go and visit a lot of people because of the travel restrictions and health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Doing things that will get this on the radar screens of individuals who then can reach out to us will be really important. And that can be done through letters. It can be done through Zoom meetings at clubs and all of that. But again, that is just getting people aware and then letting them talk to us. We're not going to specifically craft an individual gift plan in a mass media communication because it's going to be very different one-on-one. We can't, because all our gifts are going to be different. You know, I could spend hours talking with one person, and that conversation is only appropriate to them and their situation. It's not universal to other people. And also, we can't do through mass communications any listening. And the most important thing to do here is listen.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Stewardship is the most important part of the cycle. It's the most important part of the cycle for a couple reasons. One is we have an ethical duty to share appreciation with people who have shared a gift. And so therefore, you know, I don't necessarily think I have an ethical obligation to go out and raise money from people or ask them to give it. But once they do, we have an ethical obligation to show our appreciation. And so we need to thank our donors and make them feel appreciated. We need to say thank you. All of our parents taught us that when we were children, say thank you. And those lessons are still true today. We need to say thank you. So how do we do that? It's a maxim that says say thank you 7 times in 7 different ways. And so if we're looking at a donor I worked with made a gift and I want to make sure they feel really appreciated, how can I do that in 7 times in 7 different ways? That can just be kind of a guiding principle. Maybe I send a note, maybe I say it verbally, maybe I send them a card, maybe I put their name on the banner up at the front of the club that says they're a major donor, and we do that for all our major donors in our club, or I give them a crystal, whatever it is, you know, think about it. Most donors prefer to be thanked by seeing the example of their good work. So if I give to a project to put a well in a village that didn't used to have one, I really feel the most thanked when I see that the well is there and the kids in the village have clean water. So letting people know that their gift had the impact they wanted it to have is probably the best way of all to do stewardship. Of course, Rotary provides official recognition materials. So when someone becomes a major donor or a Bequest Society member or changes levels within those programs or joins the Arch Clump Society or the Legacy Society, there are appropriate recognition materials available from Rotary International Headquarters, crystals, art pieces, wearable recognition. And we want to make sure that those are presented to the donor in the way that the donor wants them presented, that makes the most sense. And we want to personally thank them and really celebrate their giving. We want to thank them in the way that the donor wants to be thanked. Just because I might like to be called up on stage in front of everyone at my club and get a standing ovation does not mean that every other donor likes that too. And so we really want to ask our donors, how would you like to be thanked? How can we best show appreciation and celebrate this great philanthropic impact? And not assume that the donors would like the same method of recognition that we would like, but ask them and do our best to accommodate their wishes. Stewardship is cyclical, I guess I should say, in that it leads back into cultivation. If you look at it best as a spiral staircase, where at the bottom of the spiral staircase, we start with identification, and then we take the next step up into cultivation, and then solicitation, and then stewardship. And each one of those steps might be several steps on the staircase, but we're going higher and higher. And eventually, stewardship will evolve back into cultivation for another gift. And then we'll get to another solicitation. And then we'll get to more stewardship. And we go up and up and up and up that staircase. And that's really how it works. And it's fun to watch over the years when you get to work with the same donors over years. You get to watch that happen. You know, we're talking about stewardship and we're talking about their last gift and the impact it had. And then over time, those conversations shift from talking largely about their last gift to talking about their next gift. And that's kind of when we've focused from stewardship back into the cultivation cycle. And if we take that order to our work, we're more efficient and more effective and give our donors better service than if we just kind of take a haphazard approach to it. So I encourage, think about organizing your work around those steps. let's see. Yeah, I guess I'll take us into this section and then we'll, okay. Sorry, as an extrovert, I think out loud. And so when I'm thinking about things, you get to hear it. And that's annoying to a lot of people, so I apologize for that. My fellow extroverts can probably relate. So now we're into the knowing part. You know, I said that in order to be good matchmakers or fundraisers, we have to know both what the donors' desires are, their appetite, and we have to know the offerings of the foundation or the menu. We're going to look now at the menu, the Rotary side of that, and then we're going to end our session today after we do that. And then when we pick up our session next week, we're going to look at the donor side, looking at their appetites. So this is the official mission of the Rotary Foundation. You know, Arch Klump started our foundation 103 years ago, and his goal was so that Rotarians would have a tool with which to do good in the world. And I still don't have any, 103 years later, I don't have better language to describe what the Rotary Foundation is about. It's just a tool for us Rotarians and others who want to use it to do good in the world. And I think it's the best tool around. I'm going to move quickly through this stuff because you probably know it, and it's going to be given to you on the slide deck at the end so you can reference it. But we do know that our #1 goal is the eradication of polio, and that will be our #1 goal until we're done with the job. We as Rotarians have made a promise to the world that we would eradicate polio, and we as Rotarians keep our promise, we keep our word, and this is no exception. We will eradicate polio, and the primary way that we do that is to raise money for the cause. And Polio Plus is the fund with which we put the money, in which we put the money that we raise polio eradication. We all know that we are in a partnership with the Gates Foundation, so that every dollar we raise will be matched by 2 from their foundation. There are lots of great polio resources on our webpage. Bernie can be your best resource for polio resources as your polio chair, and you and your district know how important polio eradication is. So when we're talking with our donors, we want to make sure that donors know about the Gates match opportunity and that this is our #1 priority. And we all, as every Rotarian, should participate in Polio Plus in some way. You know how we organize our work that's not polio. You know that we do district grants and global grants. You know that the Rotary Foundation believes in doing good work in our own communities where we live and in communities around the world, and that we do that in partnership with other Rotarians. One of the things that's unique about Rotary, I had the opportunity last Saturday to speak to a group of Rotaractors. You know, with the changes on the relationship of Rotaractors to Rotary, we're trying to educate Rotaractors more about our foundation. And so I did an online training with some of them last Saturday, and it was their first introduction to our foundation. And I want to tell you, they're an impressive group. Med students, I mean, really sharp people in this Rotaract community, going to be great assets to come together with us Rotarians. And they were all wanting to learn. And I said, one of the things that's unique about the Rotary Foundation is that we both raise money and spend money ourselves. Most foundations only do one or the other. Think about the Ford Foundation. They spend money. They got their money from the Ford Motor Company and they spend it. Think about the Gates Foundation. They got their money from Microsoft and Buffett and the other contributors, and they spend it. Carnegie, you know, they got their money from Carnegie and they spend it. And then there are other groups like United Way. They raise money and then they dole it out to other people to spend. Whereas the Rotary Foundation, we both raise money from our own membership, and then it's our own membership that spends it on our own projects. So we do both, and that's rather unique for a foundation. We're kind of in our own category there. And the way we spend our money is Rotarian to Rotarian. We don't spend a dime on any of these grants, globally or district-wise, without Rotarians in the area where the money's going to be spent have identified a need. So we can trust that the need is legitimate because one of us has said, in my community, there's this need. And that's got a lot of value to it. I might not know too much about this place in the world, but I know that a fellow Rotarian who lives there has identified a legitimate need. So therefore, I can trust that this really is a good project. And it's going to be done well because Rotarians in that community are involved with the doing of it. And so that's something we can really celebrate. And I don't have to be an expert on everything because we've got people who are. So I can trust that we have the experts in Rotary to be the people to make the decisions. I can participate in a water project without knowing a thing about how to build a water filtration system because we've got that expertise in our world of Rotary. I can give to that and know it's being done well because Rotarians are doing it. That's something we can really be proud of, and it helps us to fundraise knowing that. District grants, of course, are dependent on the district, and you know how your district does district grants. Every district is different, and you can share that information with your donors. And you know what global grants your district is participating in. You can share that with your donors as well. Every global grant is done in one of our 6 areas of focus. And when you have a donor who really cares about one of these 6 areas of focus, if they want to, they can direct their gift to go to that area of focus. And so this is an opportunity for donors who care about particular areas of focus to really put their money where they want it to go. We offer that as an option. And many of you on this call are particularly passionate about these. I know several of you are education and literacy donors. We also have water and sanitation donors and peace donors on this call. And so you know what I mean when I say you have an opportunity through Rotary to impact the world in the area of focus that you want to impact it in. Logistically, the way we organize our money so that we can accomplish those goals is that we have 3 principal funds at the Rotary Foundation. Money that's given for polio goes into the Polio Plus Fund where it's kept very liquid because we want to spend that money to eradicate polio quickly. Gifts that are made to the annual fund get invested on a 3-year cycle. They're invested for 3 years. The earnings on that 3-year cycle get used to pay for our operating costs. If there's any money left after our operating costs have been paid for, we fund 3 years worth of operating reserves so that we could afford to go 3 years without receiving any income, without having to cut our operations. And then if there's money left after that, we spend it on philanthropic impact. During a time like this where there's an economic downturn and a lot of uncertainty, it's nice to have an organization that is so fiscally responsible, that has this model that kind of shields us from the volatility of the market more than many other places are. And that conservative approach to our finances allows us to continue to have a strong philanthropic impact in the world, much stronger than other places are able to have it at times of economic downturn. We all know of nonprofits that didn't make it through the Great Recession of 08 and on. And I'm sorry to say, I think we're going to see some other nonprofits not make it through the COVID-19 crisis too. And so that's something we can tell our donors. Rotary is solid. Rotary has been here for more than 100 years through all of these crises, and we're making our way through this one too because of our solid, sound management approach, which means it's a good place to put our philanthropic dollars for impact. After that investment cycle is over, the money comes out and it gets shared locally and globally for district grants and global grants and other worldwide projects through the World Fund, according to our values. The endowment fund is a fund that we ask Rotarians to consider giving to. The money that's put into the endowment fund never gets spent. It stays invested forever. It generates earnings, and those earnings get spent. And they get spent on whatever the donor who made the gift wants us to spend them on. So the donors can say, spend it wherever you see the most need. They can say, share my earnings globally and locally, or they can support any one of our 6 areas of focus or our peace centers. The only thing a donor cannot do with the endowment fund is provide support to polio. And the reason for that is because the endowment fund is permanent and polio is not. We will eradicate polio, and so we don't use permanent assets for a temporary disease. we will eradicate polio, but the endowment fund will be with us for purpose.
Carl, we have a couple questions that are really related to this particular slide you had up there about making contributions. Is this a good time? Can we ask those questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, let me move backwards to that slide. There we go.
Okay. One question is, can any gift be directed to a particular area of focus?
Yes, it can.
Is there a limit? Is there a threshold for that?
No, there's not. You could give $1 to water and sanitation if you wanted to.
Okay. Okay, good. Now, in terms of contributions to these funds, how does that affect club goals, district goals, things like that?
Well, that depends on what goals your club and district have set. You know, if your club has set a polio goal, then only gifts to polio will count towards your polio goal. If your club has set an annual fund goal, only gifts to the annual fund will count towards your annual fund goal. If your club has set an endowment fund goal, only gifts to the endowment fund will count. And so how your gift counts for different goals will depend on what the goals are and what goals your clubs and districts have set.
Okay. Not related to this, but let me get the question. It came in a little bit earlier. Do you have is there a presentation, a PowerPoint that is suitable for a club presentation?
There are several presentations that have been made by our professional presentation maker staff that have been made to present the foundation to clubs. I'm told that they are available on Rotary.org, but I have not personally viewed them. They're fairly new resources.
Carl,
Wonder if someone else on the call might know more than me. Lou?
Carl, can you hear me? Lou.
Yes.
I was specifically talking about a sample presentation where when we were speaking earlier about possibly identifying potential donors and contributors for the $1 Million Dinner and so forth, you mentioned that we could do this at a club meeting, but that would be sort of the first stage. And what I was thinking is there some sort of a sample?
Hold on. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, is there some sort of a sample PowerPoint that you could put together that we as our $1 Million team can actually say, okay, these are sort of the basics in terms of identifying the gift opportunities that you have. For example, charitable gift annuity, bequest, 3-year pledge, just something very general, very simple to just plant the seed in a club meeting as opposed to me just trying to walk around and talk to everybody.
That's a great idea.
Maybe it's just 4 slides.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Lou. You know, we're trying to learn new ways to do fundraising in the COVID world, and that might be a good tool for us to have to present at a Zoom meeting or something in lieu of doing other things that we can't do. I don't know of anything like that in existence right now, but I think that's a resource we could create and equip you with. I think that's a great idea. Maybe Bernie and I can work together on making one of those as a tool to go out to you all once these trainings are done. I think that could be a good step for us. Thank you.
That would be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for that great idea.
I have some other questions, but maybe Carl, I don't want to interrupt you. We'll get to the questions at the end. How's that?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
So you know this, you know how district designated funds and World Fund work. You know, I've mentioned our endowment fund. The endowment fund is made up of 2 different numbers. The dark blue number on that graph represents cash that's already been given, and the light blue number represents expectancies. And what the expectancy means is that when someone puts us in their estate plans and lets us know, we say thank you, first of all. And next, we make sure that we codify the agreement in a way that the donor knows that when the bequest is made, eventually realize that it will be used according to their wishes. That's called a testamentary gift agreement. Then what we do, once we get all of that done, is we book it as an expectancy so that we know that we can expect it. We're a generation away from receiving those expectancies, but we know down the pike they're coming. And that helps us to plan, and most importantly, helps us to celebrate with the donor the philanthropic impact that their decision today will have tomorrow. And so when we're looking at raising money for the endowment fund, we're not only talking about cash on the barrelhead, we're also talking about estate plans. And estate gifts are very important because all of us, no matter how much wealth we might have, can always do even more through an estate plan than we can with a gift during our lifetime. And so we have a lot of people like Jody, who I mentioned up in Williamsburg, who don't know that they can make a large gift through their estate planning, but they can. And if we help them realize that, and they do, we will help them have the impact they want to have, and we will help build this endowment fund for the next generation. And that's really a building it forward act that we can take today. There's a joke in the development world that the best time to be in a nonprofit is 20 years after a good planned giving officer was there. And there's a lot of truth to that. We benefit today from the decisions of the people who went before us in Rotary, and we can help the people who are coming behind us benefit from our good decisions today. And our estate planning work is really important to that success. Rate of return on our investments, 20-year average, 5%. You know, this graph shows that some years up, some years down. We all know that. The volatility we've had over the last 2 months is still kind of a question mark as to what our return is going to be this year. Right now, you know, it was down a month ago, up, who knows, but that's how markets work. We are all familiar with that. Over the course of time, they trend upward, but in any given year, they may be up or down. When a donor wants to make a gift to the endowment fund, there's kind of two things to consider. One is the funding vehicle, which we'll talk about in our next section. And the other is the opportunity for the donor to create a named fund. And this is really an opportunity that I think most Rotarians would take advantage of if they knew they could. And one of the best things that we, in an effort like this $1 Million Dinner, can have is to educate our donors about this opportunity. When we give more than $25,000 to the endowment fund, either during our lifetime or in a bequest, we can create a named fund. That means that the money we give is commingled in the endowment fund for investment purposes, but is tracked and reported on individually under the name we give the fund. If we do it during our lifetime, we get a report each year from the Rotary Foundation that says, this is what your fund did to make the world better in these past 12 months. If we set it up in an estate plan, our heirs can get the report. And this is a great legacy opportunity. You know, getting back to 103 years ago when Arch Klump started the foundation, he looked around and he saw the Carnegies and the Rockefellers starting foundations. And he said, there aren't very many Rotarians who have the individual wealth to do that. But if we all came together as Rotarians plural and made one Rotary Foundation singular, we could have that same impact. This is our opportunity to have that legacy because we're a Rotarian for our family that we might not be able to have on our own. A $25,000 bequest probably cannot start your own personal family foundation that will go on for perpetuity doing good in the world. But it can create a named fund within the Rotary Foundation that will go on having that philanthropic impact in your name. And so the next generation can get that report and that family legacy can continue. And it can be a mother-child, parent-child relationship. It can be, I want my club to know. It can be, I want my nieces and nephews. It can be, I just want the world to know. It can be a legacy opportunity for any Rotarian who wants to take advantage of that. And most Rotarians don't know they can do that. And so especially if you find a donor who already has this in their estate plans, maybe they put it in for 10 because that's what they were asked to do because that's the minimum amount to join the bequest society. And they learn that if they increase the bequest amount to 15, they can do the named fund and their kids can get the report. They're very quick to say, yes, increase it. And so this is an opportunity that we can help our donors a lot and raise a lot of money for the Rotary Foundation. Donors can also endow a global grant. So sometimes donors really care about our work in an area of focus. and they want to endow a global grant to be done in that particular area of focus. Other times donors care about a geographic location and they want the grant to be done in that geographic location. Other times donors just really like your district and want your district to be able to do as many global grants as possible. And the global grant they endow, they can either say a humanitarian grant or a scholarship grant. And I know your district has a great tradition of using your global grant program to fund global scholars. And so a donor can pick if they want to endow a global grant, if they want to endow a scholarship grant, or if they want to endow a humanitarian grant, or let the district pick. So donors have the opportunity with gifts of $250,000 or more to also endow a global grant. And a lot of donors find that appealing too. Our Peace Center endowment opportunities still exist. Even though our Peace Center endowment goal was met, we've since opened up another Peace Center in Africa, in Makerere, and we are working to build that program even stronger. And we do our good work and we do it well. For more than a decade now, we have received the highest rating possible from Charity Navigator, the independent charity monitoring group that evaluates and rates charities across the country. We received the highest score from them now for more than a decade. So even though I am paid by the Rotary Foundation and I'm a longtime Rotarian and I'm therefore biased in my personal words, I can honestly say, don't take my word for it. Look at what the independent evaluators are saying. And when we're looking to trust someone with a gift of accumulated assets that we work very hard to earn, we want to make sure we're trusting somebody who's trustworthy. And the Rotary Foundation has proven ourselves trustworthy. And even these independent groups say there's no one more trustworthy than the Rotary Foundation in their ratings. We spend our money well. We spend our money on program as much as possible, but we are responsible in our fundraising and our administration, and we use our investment earnings to allow us to have great impact as well as being responsible in funding those areas and in building reserves. And we don't hide any of these numbers. They're all available on our websites at any time by anybody who wants to see them. In fact, we're proud of them. This is where we're going to end today. We've got 10 minutes for questions, and we're going to pick up with this slide tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to talk about our donors and looking, or not tomorrow, next week. We're going to talk about looking at the donor side of the equation. So far, we've looked at the agency and organization side of making the match. Next week, we'll pick up and start looking at the individual donor side of things. So this is the slide I'll end on today and start with tomorrow. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bernie, who said we had some questions to talk about.
Carl, could you take the presentation down and stop sharing the screen?
Yes,
Yep.
Thank you.
So we can see, everybody can see everybody? Probably can okay, good. I'm going to have, Pauline is here, but she has asked a question specifically about DDF, and I tried to answer it, but I don't think I did. She wants to know, with all these ways of giving, which ones will generate DDF back to the district?
Great question. So first of all, annual fund share does. A gift made to annual fund share gets invested for 3 years, and afterwards 50% is to World Fund and 50% to donor designated funds. So a gift to annual fund share will generate district designated funds, short DDF. Endowment fund share will also generate DDF. The difference being that when the gift is made to endowment fund share, the gift itself stays invested forever and it generates earnings. Those earnings are then shared, half to the World Fund and half to district designated funds.
Okay. I'll just, Pauline, was that good? Was that okay? Yeah. Okay. And maybe if you have a question, just unmute yourself and just ask the question to Carl. I'm looking. You did such a great job, Carl. I will just make a comment. That going through all of this for an hour and 50 minutes, I wish everybody had a little Carl on their shoulder when we're doing this stuff, because there just seems to be so much information procedurally, things to do. You presented it in such a great way. We just need to clone you and have you available more often. I think that would be nice.
Well, we've got this. I have my iPhone, so and you've got my number.
Yeah.
And so the best we can do is talk, and we can do a video call, or we just talk on the telephone. We can email. And the last part of our training will be all of us making donor prospect lists. And then we can work one-on-one with your plans for them. And I'll offer the best support I possibly can to you. And you're right, we can't get together like we normally would, and we can't do it. We can't go and visit. We can't go and take the guy out for a cup of coffee together like we normally would, but we can still figure out the best plan forward, and we can be as communicative together as we ever could. It just has to be electronically.
All right. Anybody else? Wait a minute.
Well, we can buy some Starbucks gift cards and send to a few folks and sort of set them up for future.
That's right. That's right.
Seeing you recommended that, Lou, would you be willing to fund that little endeavor?
I'm sorry, my audio just went out. I'm sorry, but what'd you say?
That's a good idea. Good idea. Okay, everybody, we've been on this for pretty long. I didn't think it would take 2 hours, and we're a little short, but if you don't have any questions, Carl, I can't thank you enough. This has been great. Truly has been great.
Well, thank you all very much for your patience and your willingness to be creative in our solutions. And we'll do it again next week and pick up where we left off. And Bernie, thank you for all your technical help. We had a practice session, and I couldn't have done all of this slideshow stuff without Sandy and Bernie having given me a tutorial 2 days ago. So thanks to them for the...
You're very welcome. And everybody now I have to stop the recording. I guess that's required. So everybody just quiet. And I'm going to say thank you again for everybody for being on this call. And now I'm going to